Maple Creek, on the surface, was the kind of suburb featured in real estate brochures. Tree-lined streets wound past well-kept lawns fronting houses that spoke of comfortable, if not extravagant, success. Number 214, Oakwood Drive, fit seamlessly into this tableau. It was home to Mark and Claire Peterson, a couple who appeared, to neighbors and colleagues alike, to be living a version of the American dream stitched together with quiet contentment. Mark, 38, was a mid-level project manager at a reputable logistics firm. He wasn't a star destined for the C-suite, but he was reliable, put in his hours, and earned a salary that comfortably covered the mortgage on Oakwood Drive and their 2 modest car payments. He was pleasant in a reserved way, the kind of man who would hold a door open, exchange brief pleasantries about the weather, but rarely linger for deeper conversation. He attended company barbecues, nodded along in meetings, and projected an image of stable competence. To those who didn't look too closely, Mark Peterson was the definition of unremarkable in the best possible sense. Claire, 35, worked part-time as a librarian at the local branch. Her love for books and quiet order made the job a natural fit. She was the warmer half of the pair, known for her ready smile and genuine interest in others. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, baked cookies for new neighbors, and remembered birthdays. Friends described her as kind, grounded, and possessing a quiet strength. She seemed genuinely happy in her marriage, often mentioning Mark's dependability and their shared love for hiking and classic films on lazy Sunday afternoons. To the outside world, their life was a balanced equation of mutual respect and comfortable routine. Their home reflected this curated normalcy. Family photos adorned the walls, vacations to national parks, smiling faces at Christmas gatherings. The living room was tastefully decorated, comfortable without being ostentatious. A bookshelf held a mix of Claire's novels and Mark's nonfiction titles on history and business. There were no overt signs of discord, no whispers of trouble that ever seemed to reach the manicured lawns outside. They hosted occasional dinners, attended neighborhood block parties, and paid their bills on time. They were, in essence, invisible in their ordinariness. Beneath this meticulously maintained surface, however, currents flowed that no neighbor could see, currents that began with thoughts Mark Peterson kept strictly to himself. Like most people, Mark had an inner landscape populated by fantasies. Initially, these were fleeting, harmless diversions, the usual daydreams of wealth, adventure, or uninhibited passion. He'd browse the internet occasionally, drifting into the vast, unregulated territory of adult content. It was a private release valve, a way to momentarily escape the predictable rhythm of project deadlines, mortgage payments, and domestic routine. There was nothing particularly unusual about it. Millions engaged in the same solitary pastime. But within this landscape, a specific theme began to resonate with Mark more intensely than others. It wasn't overtly violent at first, not in the graphic sense. It centered on control. The fantasy involved scenarios where he held absolute power within a carefully constructed intimate context. It was about dictating terms, about another person's complete submission to his will within the bounds of this imagined scenario. The allure wasn't initially cruelty, but the intoxicating sensation of dominance, of being the undisputed center of someone's universe in that moment, bending reality to his desire. It provided a stark, thrilling contrast to his meticulously controlled but essentially passive external life. He found himself seeking out this specific flavor of fantasy more frequently. Websites, forums discussing role-play scenarios, fictional stories. He consumed them with growing focus. He began bookmarking pages, saving images and narratives that aligned with this burgeoning fixation. It started as a spark, a secret thrill in the quiet hours after Claire had gone to sleep or during his lunch break at work. He compartmentalized it fiercely, a hidden chamber in his mind locked away from the respectable facade of Mark Peterson, reliable husband and employee. This compartment, however, was slowly beginning to exert its own gravity. The line between a private mental escape and an obsession was thin, and Mark, without consciously realizing it, was starting to tread perilously close to its edge. The picture-perfect facade at 214 Oakwood Drive remained intact, but the foundation beneath it was quietly shifting, eroded by the persistent drip of a fantasy taking root in fertile, hidden ground. The human mind is a labyrinth, its darkest corridors often hidden even from the one who inhabits it. For Mark Peterson, what had begun as an occasional indulgence, a fleeting fantasy to break the monotony of his structured life, was evolving into something far more consuming. The seed had been planted, and now, unnoticed by the outside world, it began to grow. At first, it was subtle. A 5-minute browse during lunch turned into 30. A quick glance at his phone before bed became an hour lost in the glow of the screen, scrolling through forums where others shared similar desires. The more he fed the fantasy, the more it demanded. Like a vine creeping through the cracks of a stone wall, it insinuated itself into his thoughts, twisting around his rationality, reshaping his priorities. Claire noticed the distance before she could name it. There were evenings when Mark would sit on the couch beside her, his body present, but his mind somewhere else entirely. She would ask about his day, and he would respond with vague, distracted answers. Sometimes she caught him staring at her with an intensity that unsettled her. Not affection, not anger, but something harder to define. A kind of calculation, as if he were seeing her through a different lens. "You okay?" she asked one night, touching his arm as he sat motionless in front of the TV, some crime drama playing without his attention. Yeah, fine," he said, blinking as if waking from trance. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. She let it go. Marriage had its ebbs and flows. After all, maybe he was stressed about work. Maybe it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Mark's fantasies were no longer just images on a screen or fleeting daydreams. They had begun to take shape in his mind as something more tangible, something that could, with the right push, be real. He started researching, not just erotic stories or adult videos, but articles on psychology, power dynamics, even criminal cases where obsession had spiraled into action. He told himself it was curiosity, an intellectual exercise. But the truth was he was testing boundaries, his own and the one society had set. One evening, while Claire was at a book club meeting, he found himself standing in their bedroom, holding one of her silk scarves. He ran the fabric between his fingers, imagining how it would feel against skin. Not just any skin, but hers. The thought sent a jolt through him, equal parts excitement and shame. He dropped the scarf as if burned and stepped back, his pulse racing. What the hell am I doing? But the question didn't stop him. It only made him more careful. He began keeping notes, not in a physical journal, too risky, but in a password-protected folder on his laptop. Scenarios, desires, ways to bring the fantasy into reality without Claire suspecting. He rationalized it. All couples have their kinks. Maybe she'd even like it. But deep down, he knew this wasn't about mutual exploration. This was about control, about bending her to his will. The first time he tried to introduce the idea, he did it cautiously. "Have you ever thought about trying something different?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. Claire turned her head on the pillow, studying him. "Different how?" He hesitated. "You know, spicing things up." She laughed softly, not unkindly. "Mark, we've been married for 8 years. If you got some wild fantasy, just say it." But he couldn't. Not yet. The words stuck in his throat. Instead, he shrugged. "Never mind. Just a thought." She kissed his cheek and rolled over, leaving him staring at the ceiling, his mind churning. The rejection, if it could even be called that, stung more than he expected. A quiet frustration settled in his chest. She doesn't understand. She wouldn't even try. The thought festered. Over the next few weeks, his mood darkened. Small things set him off, a dish left in the sink, Claire coming home later than she'd said. He snapped at her once, then immediately apologized, blaming work stress. But the anger didn't dissipate. It simmered, feeding the growing obsession. One night, after another failed attempt to steer their intimacy toward his fantasy, he lay awake long after Claire had fallen asleep. His jaw clenched as he listened to her steady breathing. She should want this. She should want to please me. The thought echoed, louder each time. And then, unbidden, another thought followed. What if I make her? The moment the idea formed, his stomach twisted, not entirely with disgust, but with something dangerously close to anticipation. He shut his eyes tightly, as if he could erase the thought. But it was too late. The seed had taken root, and it was growing thorns. The human mind can normalize almost anything given enough time and repetition. What begins as unthinkable becomes possible, then plausible, then inevitable. For Mark Peterson, the shift from fantasy to fixation wasn't a sudden plunge. It was a slow submersion, inch by inch, into waters that should have chilled him to the bone. But he no longer felt the cold. His laptop history told the story. At first, it had been abstract, forums, erotic fiction, the occasional deep dive into psychology articles about dominance and compulsion. But now, his searches grew darker, more specific. How to manipulate someone into submission. Real-life cases of consensual non-consent gone wrong. Can a person be conditioned to obey without realizing it? He deleted his browser history every night. Claire had always been perceptive, but even she couldn't see the depth of what was happening inside him. She noticed the small things. The way he sometimes gripped her wrist a little too tightly when they kissed. The way he'd stare at her when she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. Once, while cooking dinner, she dropped a spoon, and the clatter made him jerk his head up so sharply she flinched. "Jesus, Mark, you okay?" "Fine," he muttered, bending to pick up the spoon. But his hands shook. She told herself it was stress. Work, maybe even depression. She suggested therapy once. "I don't need a fucking therapist," he snapped, his voice low and venomous. Then, just as quickly, he softened. "Sorry, I'm just tired." But tired men don't spend hours researching how to tie knots that won't slip. Tired men don't bookmark articles on sedatives and their effects. Tired men don't draft, then delete messages to strangers on dark web forums asking for advice on how to make her understand. The fantasies weren't enough anymore. He needed more. He started testing boundaries in small ways. During sex, he'd grip her hips harder than before, ignoring her murmured easy. He'd pin her hands above her head, not playfully, but with a quiet intensity that left her unsettled. Afterward, he'd roll away without a word, lost in thought. One night, he brought home a blindfold. "Just to try something new," he said, forcing a smile. Claire hesitated. "I don't know. Come on," he coaxed, stroking her arm. "Trust me." She did. That was the problem. The moment the fabric covered her eyes, something in him shifted. His breathing changed. His touch turned clinical, deliberate. She couldn't see his face, the way his pupils dilated, the way his jaw clenched as he watched her squirm. "Mark," she said, her voice uncertain. "Maybe we should." "Chill." He pressed a finger to her lips. "Just let go." She stiffened. He felt it. And for the first time, the resistance didn't frustrate him. It excited him. Afterward, Claire was quiet, distant. She showered immediately, the water running longer than usual. When she came to bed, she faced the wall. Mark lay beside her, wide awake, his mind racing. She resisted. Next time, I won't give her the chance. The silence between them had become a living thing, a third presence in the house that slithered into conversations and coiled around their bed at night. Claire no longer recognized the man sleeping beside her. The Mark she married had been steady, predictable, safe. This version of him carried something volatile beneath his skin, like a faulty wire sparking in the dark. She began keeping a mental list of the changes. The way he'd abruptly stop touching her if she didn't respond exactly how he wanted. The new lock on his office door. The nights he claimed to be working late, but came home smelling of whiskey and something metallic she couldn't name. One Tuesday morning, while Mark was in the shower, Claire made her first deliberate intrusion into his privacy. His phone lay, charging on a nightstand, vibrating with a notification. The sender was listed only as M. The message preview read, "The shipment arrives Thursday. You sure you don't want the..." The rest was cut off. Her thumb hovered over the screen. 8 years of trust warred with 8 weeks of creeping dread. The water shut off in the bathroom. She put the phone down. That afternoon, She drove to the library but didn't go inside. Instead, she sat in the parking lot and called her sister. "Lena, I think something's wrong with Mark." A pause. "Wrong how?" "He's different." Claire twisted the car, keys in her hand. "The way he looks at me sometimes. Like he's waiting for me to..." She broke off. "To what?" "I don't know. A beat. Have you ever Googled someone's symptoms and wished you hadn't?" Lena's voice sharpened. "Claire, are you safe?" The question startled her. Of course she was safe. This was Mark. Her Mark. The man who still made coffee for her every morning, who remembered her mother's birthday, who had pressed a pillow over her face last week during sex and didn't remove it until she clawed his wrists. "It's complicated," Claire whispered. Mark sat in his locked office, a spreadsheet open on his monitor. To anyone glancing through the window, he appeared to be working. The reality was far more meticulous. Column A, dates. Column B, Claire's schedule. Column C, dosage calculations. Column D, ideal scenarios. He'd stopped calling it a fantasy in his private thoughts. Now he referred to it as the plan. The basement freezer contained 2 vials of veterinary tranquilizers purchased from Marcus, a former college roommate who now worked at an animal clinic and asked no questions. The garage held neatly coiled rope beneath a tarp of old camping gear. Most importantly, the guest bedroom closet now locked from the outside, a recent home improvement project Claire had praised him for. His phone buzzed. "Marcus again. Seriously, man, you need to test the dosage first. That much could stop a..." Mark deleted the message. He knew the risks. That was half the thrill. That night, Claire pretended to be asleep when Mark slid into bed. She kept her breathing slow, and even as his fingers traced her shoulder, down her arm, coming to rest just above her elbow, his grip tightened experimentally. She didn't move. After a minute, his hand withdrew. She heard the rustle of him turning away, the soft sigh of disappointment. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. In the darkness, both spouses lay awake, one calculating odds, the other counting exits. The shadow between them grew teeth. The human psyche has fail-safes, lines we believe we can never cross. But obsession has a way of rewiring those safeguards, turning unthinkable into inevitable. For Mark Peterson, that line dissolved on a rainy Thursday evening, with the sound of Claire's keys jingling in the front door. She was home earlier than expected. Wrong. All wrong. Mark stood frozen in the guest bedroom, the newly installed lock glinting in his palm. The bed was neatly made, the pillows fluffed, just as he'd prepared it. The ropes were already secure beneath the frame, invisible unless you knew to look. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus's final warning about the tranquilizer dosage. Downstairs, the front door clicked shut. "Mark?" Claire's voice floated up the stairs. "You home?" Every muscle in his body tensed. This wasn't the plan. The plan required precision. Her usual 6:30 return, the yoga class that left her relaxed and unsuspecting, the chamomile tea he'd lace with just enough to make her pliant, but not unconscious. Now she was here at 5:47, her footsteps already on the stairs, and was that a second set of footsteps? "Up here," he called, slipping the lock into his dresser drawer. His pulse hammered in his throat as the door opened. Claire entered with Lena trailing behind her, the sister's sharp eyes scanning the room. "Oh," Claire said, blinking at the maid bed. "You're cleaning the guest room?" Mark forced a smile. "Thought your parents might visit next month." A lie so smooth it terrified him. Lena didn't smile back. Her gaze dropped to the dresser drawer he'd just closed, then to the faint indents in the carpet where the bed had been moved. When she met Mark's eyes again, her expression held the cold certainty of a predator recognizing another. Claire, oblivious, touched his arm. "Lena's staying for dinner. Hope that's okay." "Of course," Mark said, squeezing her hand too tight. The kitchen knives needed sharpening. Mark noted this as he diced vegetables for the salad, the blade catching clumsily on a tomato's skin. Across the island, Lena watched him with the intensity of a hawk circling prey. Claire chatted about a library fundraiser, her words rushing like she was trying to outpace the silence. "You two seem tense," Claire ventured during a lull. Lena speared an olive with her fork. just wondering why Mark's hands are shaking. The knife stilled. Claire's breath hitched. Mark set down the blade carefully. Long day at work. Funny. Lena tilted her head. Claire said you took the afternoon off. A beat of silence. The refrigerator hummed. Claire's phone rang. A save grace. She practically lunged for it. Hello? Oh, yes, Mrs. Wilkins, I can check our inventory. She hurried into the living room, relief palpable. The moment the door swung shut, Lena leaned forward. Let's skip the bullshit. What's in the guest room closet? Mark wiped his hands on a towel. Christmas decorations. And the drawer you didn't want us to see? Lena. He smiled, the expression all teeth. Are you accusing me of something? She matched his smile. Not yet. When Claire returned, she found them eating in perfect silence, the salad untouched on her plate. That night, Mark lay awake long after Claire fell asleep. Lena's words coiled in his mind like smoke. Not yet. Meaning, I'm watching. Meaning, she told me. Meaning, your time is running out. He turned his head to study Claire in the moonlight, the flutter of her eyelids in dream, the trusting way her hand lay open near his pillow. Something ugly twisted in his chest. She betrayed him, shared their private business, brought that bitch into their home to spy on him. His fingers itched for the dresser drawer where the lock waited. Not yet, but soon. The point of no return wasn't a moment, he realized. It was a series of choices, each one easier than the last. Rain lashed against the windows of 214 Oakwood Drive, the kind of storm that makes the world feel hollowed out and abandoned. Inside, the house pulsed with a different kind of electricity, the kind that builds before lightning strikes. Claire stood at the bathroom sink, gripping the porcelain as she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back had shadows under her eyes, lips pressed into a bloodless line. 3 days had passed since Lena's visit. 3 days of Mark's eerie calm, of finding her things moved just slightly. Her toothbrush angled the wrong way in the holder, her favorite sweater folded into the wrong drawer. Gaslighting 101, Lena had said during their hushed phone call that afternoon. He wants you to doubt your own mind. The bathroom doorknob rattled. Almost done, Claire called too brightly. The rattling stopped. Then came Mark's voice, smooth as oil. Take your time. His footsteps retreated down the hall, but not toward the bedroom, toward the guest room. Claire's breath came fast. She pulled out her phone, thumbs flying over the screen. He's acting weird again, going into the guest room at night. I think. A floorboard creaked right outside the door. She locked her phone just as the knob turned. Mark stood in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. Chamomile, he said, offering one. Thought you could use it. Her fingers trembled as she took it. The scent was wrong, bitter beneath the honey. Thanks, she whispered. He didn't leave, just watched as she raised the mug to her lips, pretending to sip. Over the rim, her eyes caught on what peeked from his pocket. Not his usual phone, but something smaller. A key. The guest room key. 2:17 a.m. The storm had swallowed the moon. Claire lay perfectly still, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside her. She'd poured the tea down the sink when he wasn't looking, but the act had left her jittery, hyper-aware. Every rustle of sheets sounded like a threat. Then, the creak of their bed frame as Mark rose. She slitted her eyes open just enough to see him move toward the dresser, his movements precise in the dark. The drawer slid open with barely a sound. Something metallic glinted in his hand. The lock. Claire's pulse became a living thing in her throat. She forced her breathing to stay, even as he paused at the door, glancing back at her. 1 beat. 2. Then he slipped into the hall. The moment the door clicked shut, she was moving. Her phone, where was her phone? Charging on Mark's side of the bed. No time. She followed instead. The hallway stretched endlessly, the hardwood icy under her bare feet. Light leaked from beneath the guest room door. Muffled sounds, something being dragged, a low hum of satisfaction. Claire pressed her ear to the wood. Click. The sound of their digital camera powering on. Her blood turned to slush. Then a new sound. The back door opening downstairs. A voice calling out. Claire? You there? Lena. Mark's footsteps froze mid-guest room. Claire didn't think. She ran. Lena. The house erupted into chaos. Mark's door banged open as Claire hit the stairs. She heard his roar of rage, saw Lena's wide eyes in the foyer below. "Call 911. Claire screamed, skidding into the kitchen just as Mark reached the bottom step. The knives. The dull knives. She yanked the drawer open as Mark lunged. The rain had turned Maple Creek streets into dark mirrors when Detective Rebecca Morales arrived at 214 Oakwood Drive. The first patrol units were already there, their flashlights cutting nervous paths through the pre-dawn gloom. Officer Hayes met her at the door, his face taut. "Detective, it's worse than the call suggested." The scene unfolded like a grim diorama. In the kitchen, Claire Peterson sat wrapped in a shock blanket, her sister Lena fiercely clutching her uninjured hand. A paramedic dabbed at a shallow, jagged cut on Claire's forearm. "A defensive wound," Hayes explained. Near the refrigerator, a chef's knife lay discarded, its tip snapped clean off. But it was the man handcuffed at the dining table who drew Morales' immediate focus. Mark Peterson sat unervingly still, his posture relaxed, his eyes tracking her entrance with detached curiosity. He looked like a man waiting for a delayed train, not one facing attempted murder charges. Morales started with the obvious. "Mr. Peterson, care to explain what happened here?" Mark sighed, the sound weary but controlled. "A regrettable marital misunderstanding, Detective. My wife has an overactive imagination, and her sister tends to escalate things." His gaze flicked toward Claire, who flinched as if struck. She got startled, grabbed a knife. "I was only trying to calm her down when she cut herself." Lena burst in, saw the blood, and panicked. The lie was smooth, rehearsed. Claire's voice rasped, raw with terror and exhaustion. "He's lying. He was going to lock me in the guest room. He had things set up. Camera, ropes." Her words dissolved into shuddering breaths. Lena tightened her grip, shooting Mark a look of pure venom. "Guest room," Morales stated, not a question. Hayes nodded grimly and led the way upstairs. The guest room door stood open. What Morales saw inside wasn't a bedroom. It was a stage set for a nightmare. A sturdy tripod stood angled precisely toward the bed, a high-definition digital camera mounted atop it, its power light still glowing a faint red. The bed itself seemed innocuous until Morales crouched and lifted the dust ruffle. Thick nylon ropes were expertly coiled and secured to the bed frame's legs and central supports. The knots complex and efficient, climber's knots, she noted clinically, but repurposed. On the nightstand, tucked inside a hollowed-out hardcover copy of Moby Dick, she found the vials, two small glass containers labeled with a chemical name she recognized from farm raids, xylazine, a potent veterinary tranquilizer. Beside them lay unused syringes in sterile packaging. The air smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and new rope. Downstairs, the interrogation was going nowhere. Mark stuck doggedly to his narrative of marital strife and overreaction. He dismissed the guest room setup as misinterpreted hobby equipment. The camera for documenting home projects, the ropes for securing luggage, the drugs belonging to an elderly diabetic neighbor he sometimes helped. His calm was unnerving, his answers just plausible enough to sow a seed of doubt in a less experienced officer. But Morales had seen the terror in Claire's eyes, the meticulous cruelty of the guest room. She needed the digital story. Back at the precinct, the evidence mounted with cold, digital clarity. Mark's seized laptop yielded a trove of horrors. His encrypted cloud storage wasn't just a repository. It was a roadmap to obsession. Search histories painted a chilling timeline. Dosage for xylazine in humans. How long does deep sedation last? Best knots for immobilization. Soundproofing a room cheaply. Can consent be given under sedation? Over 100 such queries in the last month alone, meticulously cleared from his browser, but recovered by forensic techs. Then came the documents. A folder cryptically named Renovation Plans contained detailed, typewritten scenarios. One passage, highlighted in yellow, made Morales' blood run cold. Resistance is expected, part of the authenticity. The medication will ensure safety and compliance. Initial fear will transition to acceptance, once the reality of the bond is understood. A break came when patrol officers brought in Marcus Rinaldi, sweating and pale, identified from phone records and Mark's messages. Confronted with the evidence, Marcus cracked almost immediately. He said it was for anxiety. His dog. "I swear I didn't know," he babbled, admitting he'd siphoned the xylazine from the animal clinic where he worked, pressured by Mark's veiled threats about exposing past indiscretions. "He paid me cash," said he'd handle the dosage. The final blow to Mark's facade came from Claire herself. Guided by Lena, she had surreptitiously recorded arguments on her phone during the preceding week of terror. The audio files were shaky, filled with the sounds of Claire's panicked breathing, but Mark's voice was chillingly clear. In one, he hissed, "You fight it because you're scared. But you'll learn. You'll learn to love this, to need it." In another, a cold threat. Lena shouldn't stick her nose in. People get hurt that way. As Morales reviewed the mountain of evidence, the physical setup, the digital trail, the witness testimony, the damning recordings of facts arrived from juvenile services, unsealed under exigent circumstances. Pages detailed incidents Mark's family had buried. Age 12, suspended for dissecting a live frog during science class, telling the principal, "I wanted to see how long it would take." Age 14, investigated though not charged, after neighborhood pets began disappearing, later found mutilated near a creek. Morales looked at the interrogation room monitor. Mark sat sipping water, humming tunelessly, the picture of bored innocence. The picture-perfect facade had finally shattered, revealing the abyss beneath. The discovery wasn't just chilling, it was a plunge into ice. The fluorescent lights of the county jail interview room buzzed like angry insects as ADA William Carter flipped through the case file. Across the metal table, Mark Peterson sat with his cuffed hands folded neatly, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. He declined a lawyer 3 times now, a fact that made Carter's skin prickle. "You understand the charges against you, Mr. Peterson?" Carter began, watching the man's pupils. Mark exhaled through his nose, amused. "Attempted murder, they tell me. Though I'd argue my wife's dramatic tendencies and my sister-in-law's hero complex have rather inflated the situation." Carter didn't blink. "We have your search history, the ropes, the tranquilizers from your buddy Marcus." He leaned forward. That guest room wasn't a fantasy. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. For the first time, Mark's mask slipped, just a twitch beneath his left eye. Consenting adults explore all sorts of consent. Carter cut him off, sliding a crime scene photo across the table. The image showed Claire's blood smeared on the kitchen tile. "Does that look like consent to you?" Silence pooled between them. Somewhere down the hall, a drunk screamed obscenities. Claire sat in a sunlit interview room at the women's shelter, wrapped in a borrowed sweater 2 sizes too big. The detective had warned her Mark's family would fight dirty. She just hadn't expected the depths. Her phone buzzed with the 5th unknown number that hour. The text read, "Think really hard before ruining a good man's life over your hysterics." Lena snatched the phone, snarling. His mother. "I know that passive-aggressive bullshit anywhere." The worst part? The Petersons weren't entirely wrong. The defense had already subpoenaed Claire's old college journals, pages where she'd once mused about dark fantasies during a human sexuality course. Mark's attorney would paint her as unstable, a woman who'd cried wolf. Dr. Chun, the soft-spoken trauma specialist, squeezed Claire's knee. "They're gaslighting you. Again, but this time, we have proof." She meant the guest room footage. The camera had been rolling when Mark tested his setup, muttering to himself as he adjusted the ropes. The video showed him injecting an orange with xylazine, timing how long it took for the juice to stop flowing when squeezed. "Perfect," he'd whispered to the empty room. "She'll be pliant but awake. I want her to remember this." The preliminary hearing was a circus. Mark's parents sat in the front row, their designer clothes at odds with the courtroom's peeling linoleum. His mother clutched a rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. His father, a retired judge, glared at Claire like she was the criminal. The defense attorney, a slick-haired shark named Reynolds, went straight for the jugular. "Mrs. Peterson, isn't it true you wrote extensively about rape fantasies in your 20s?" Claire's stomach turned. Academic discussions about. Yes or no? Before she could answer, ADA Carter objected. But the damage was done. The gallery buzzed. Then came Marcus Rinaldi's testimony. The vet tech squirmed on the stand, his voice barely above a whisper as he admitted supplying the drugs. Reynolds eviscerated him. So you, a convicted opioid addict, illegally obtained veterinary tranquilizers, but we're to believe upstanding Mark Peterson was the mastermind. Marcus wilted. The jury frowned. That night, alone in her sister's spare bedroom, Claire stared at the ceiling. The hearing had been a disaster. Mark's family had money, connections, and narrative. Her phone lit up. Another text from an unknown number. This one contained a single screenshot. Mark's juvenile records, the page about the frog dissection blurred beyond recognition. Accidents happen, read the message. Think about your future. Claire's fingers trembled as she forwarded it to Detective Morales. The webs of deceit weren't unraveling. They were tightening around her throat. The courtroom air hung thick with anticipation as Dr. Eleanor Shaw adjusted her glasses and took the stand. The renowned forensic psychiatrist's testimony would prove to be the trial's turning point. Based on 30 hours of evaluation, Dr. Shaw stated, her voice cutting through the silence, Mr. Peterson exhibits classic signs of sexual sadism disorder with narcissistic and antisocial traits. She paused, letting the words sink in. This isn't about fantasy exploration between consenting adults. This is about deriving pleasure from another's suffering and lack of consent. Mark's smirk faltered when Dr. Shaw detailed his Rorschach responses, an alarming pattern of seeing bound figures screaming in ink blots. The final nail came when she quoted his own words back to him. Real power isn't given, it's taken. ADA Carter approached the witness box. Doctor, in your professional opinion, was Claire Peterson in any real danger? Dr. Shaw didn't hesitate. The guest room setup wasn't theatrical. It was a serial predator's prototype. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. Reynolds waved Claire's old journals like a weapon. Doctor, he sneered, doesn't this entry about being taken prove Mrs. Peterson shared these so-called dark fantasies? Dr. Shaw's rebuttal was ice cold. There's an ocean between consensual role play and premeditated violence. One is intimacy. The other is homicide waiting to happen. She turned to the jury. Victims often blame themselves. They'll revisit past writings, wondering if they asked for it. That's the predator's greatest trick, making the hunted question their own instincts. Claire's quiet sob echoed through the courtroom. The smoking gun came unexpectedly. During a recess, bailiffs found Mark whispering to his father. The recording device in his holding cell had captured every word. Should have started with Lena first. Cut the bitch out of the equation. When played in court, even Mark's mother dropped her rosary. The verdict came down on a Thursday morning, the kind of bright autumn day that made cruelty seem impossible. When the foreperson uttered guilty on all counts, attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, possession of controlled substances with intent to harm, the courtroom erupted. Mark's mother wailed like a wounded animal. His father sat stone-faced, already calculating appeal strategies. But it was Mark's reaction that would haunt Claire forever. As the bailiffs snapped the cuffs around his wrists, his polished facade finally cracked. Not with remorse, but with the petulant fury of a child whose toy had been taken away. You'll regret this, he hissed at Claire, spit flying from his lips. When I get out, the rest was cut off as they dragged him away, but the promise hung in the air like gun smoke. 6 months later, the letters began arriving. Claire found the first one in her mailbox at the new apartment, the one Lena had helped her lease under a fake name. The envelope bore no return address, just her name written in that achingly familiar handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of prison-issued paper. You left your blue scarf in the guest room closet. I keep it under my pillow. It still smells like you when I press my face into it at night. Detective Morales took the note with gloved hands. He's not supposed to contact you, she muttered. Wheel. It doesn't matter, Claire interrupted, staring at her hands. They no longer shook. He gets off on knowing I'm scared. I won't give him that anymore. The prison psychiatrist's evaluation, leaked to the press, revealed the chilling footnote to Mark's case. Subject maintains elaborate fantasies of finishing what he started. When confronted with victim impact statements, displayed inappropriate laughter. Diagnosis: psychopathic sexual sadism with high recidivism risk. Meanwhile, in a women's shelter where Claire volunteered every Tuesday, a new survivor asked the question she'd come to expect. How do you stop being afraid? Claire thought of the self-defense classes she now taught, the way her hands could now break a training dummy's nose without flinching. She remembered the weight of the courtroom gavel, the solid finality of a cell door locking. You don't, she said honestly, but you learn to carry it, like a scar. The final irony came in the form of Mark's prison journal, confiscated during a routine search. In meticulous script, he'd written, mistakes were made. Next time, no sister, no camera, no witnesses. The warden forwarded it to the parole board with a red stamp. Lifetime supervision recommended. On the anniversary of that terrible night, Claire returned to Maple Creek for the first time. The new owners of 214 Oakwood Drive had torn out the guest room closet, converted the space into a sunny reading nook. They offered to show her, but she declined. Instead, she visited the animal shelter where she'd once volunteered. A scrappy terrier mix pressed against the bars of his kennel, licking her fingers desperately. His name's Chance, the attendant said. Owner surrendered him, said he was too difficult to control. Claire felt the dog's racing heartbeat against her palm. Perfect, she whispered, as she walked Chance through the shelter doors, the autumn sun warm on their backs. Neither of them looked over their shoulder. Not even once.